Awesome. Free to land, y'all. And welcome back for our second iteration of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement Summer School. My name is Moose. I use he, him, and they, the pronouns. I'm an organizing member with the Atlanta chapter of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And for those who aren't familiar with MXGM, it's an organization that is committed to the self-determination, self-defense, and the self-respect of Black and New African people. We situate ourselves within a long legacy, a revolutionary struggle for the liberation of our people. Currently, we have 8 chapters. And so if you are in Philly, DC, Atlanta, and some of our other places across the country, feel free to think about joining the squad. As you can see on the slide, we operate under 6 of our principles of unity. Um, First and foremost, we're about defending the human rights of African people. We also are about demanding reparations for the legacies of harms and violence that we have and continue to experience. Third, we're also about promoting self-determination. We're against genocide that has historically been happening to our people and has been happening to peoples all over the world at the hands of the American Empire. We're also against the continued captivity of political prisoners and of prisoners of war, POWs, and the continued exile of political exiles. And we're also against gender and sexual oppression. All right, so those are the 6 principles of unity. If those sound good to you, then definitely consider joining our organization. But those are going to be the principles that are going to be animating how we move through summer school. At this point, if you haven't yet, please rename yourself with your name and pronouns. And we will be dropping some information in the chat box as well. Uh, Now, I just want to also reiterate that we are expecting folks to abide by our 7 aspects of the MXGM personality. And I will go over them again as we did last week. First, always be humble when dealing with African people. We can be humble and firm at the same time. Respect the actions and customs of others. Never engage in petty, senseless arguments. That being said, don't go places looking for arguments either, right? Or ideological or otherwise. Notwithstanding that, never be afraid to wage ideological struggle or ask questions if it's for the purposes of seeking political clarity. Never talk just to be seen or heard. And finally, always practice criticism and self-criticism. In addition to those aspects of the MXGM personality, we have the 7 commandments of Umoja, which are also listed here. One is aid each other. Two is be positive. Three, be patient. Four, move in with being honest. Five, and most importantly, in this land of so much, in this time of so much cowardice, show courage. Six, listen as much as you talk. And seven, we're making critiques and offerings. Please be programmatic. All right. And I got, yeah, hopefully the folks in the chat can check out what Al just left for us to take into account. Okay. This is great. I'm a minute ahead. All right. And so the moment we've been waiting for, today's speaker for the People's Assembly, Joshua M. Meyers, who I've had the pleasure of meeting, I guess maybe a couple years ago at a conference, and enjoyed being able to build with you, brother, and happy to have you here. He's an associate professor of Africana Studies in the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. He's the author of Holy Ghost Key, which won the 2023 Naomi Long Magic Poetry Prize. He's also author of Black Study, Cedric Robinson, The Time of Black Radical Tradition, and We Are Worth Fighting For, A History of the Howard University Student Protests in 1989. He's also the editor of A Gathering Together, a literary journal. His research interests include Africana intellectual histories and traditions, Africana philosophy, which is dear to my heart. That's what I studied in undergrad, musics, and foodways, as well as critical university studies and disciplinarity. His work has been published in a number of places. I'm gonna just add a couple of them. Topia, Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies, Zanj, the Journal of Critical Global South Studies, Critical Ethnic Studies Journal, Washington History, the Journal of Academic Freedom, the Journal of African American Studies, and so many more. He serves on the board of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations and the SNCC Legacy Project, and is a senior content producer at the African World Now Project. He was the co-coordinator of the SNCC Legacy Project's Black Power Chronicles Oral History Project, and he organizes with Washington, D.C.'s Positive Black Folks in Action. He's on the editorial boards of The Compass and a few other places. And I'll just end by saying a central thread that guides all of this brother's work is an approach to knowledge that takes seriously the peoples of African descent possess a deep sense of reality, a thought tradition that more than merely interprets what is around us, but can transform and renew these spaces we inhabit, a world we would like to fundamentally change. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to you, my good brother, and looking forward to your sharings with us this evening.
Oh man, thanks, brother. Thanks for that introduction. And I didn't realize it was you at first. That was on the call. Good to see you again. Um, wow, that was 2 years ago, I guess. Up in Montreal. Thanks to Zalika as well for the invitation. This is, really what Black Studies is supposed to do, primarily. Like this is our foundation. Um, Everything from the thrust that you laid out that guide this organization to the very namesake of this org. This is Black Studies through and through. And what I like to do today is to just put out some markers, if you will, um, around the words in the title, which was something that Zalika and I collectively came up with. This idea of practice and study. I'm gonna start with study. And about 2 years ago, I guess a little over 2 years ago, I was approached by Christina Sharp and Tina Camp to participate in a project that they are calling a Black lexicon. And essentially, scholars were given words to kind of think about how Blackness transforms how we might think of these words, or what does Blackness have to do with these words. And this is going to be a collected volume, edited volume is going to come out next year. And they gave me the word study. And I'm going to read what I came up with that's going to be a part of that volume. Study. Study to show thyself approved unto God. 2 Timothy 2:15. I am thinking about some of the times I heard Black people tell me to study and what they meant, really meant. They were quoting Paul, but it felt like wisdom from somewhere deeper, since Paul was probably quoting someone else anyway. Perhaps it was just the circumstances of my own biography, but everything I remember about study seemed to always center religious instruction. Being Black and Christian in South Carolina meant a lot of study. We worshiped on Sundays and then studied during the week. I can still hear them reminding me, you got Bible study tonight. This was after school, after homework. There was yet still more to study. I down out of the side in African American traditional. I've been thinking about some of the times I heard Black people sing this word study. What is studying war even? Who wrote this lyric and why? What war were they talking about? The war metaphor is more than metaphor. We black folk be at war with this world. This song, with both lyrics and sound composed by ancestors at war with enslavement, says we finna lay down our sword and shield down by the riverside. Rivers are ubiquitous in black folk life, passageways and transitions, moving away, creating distance from the antagonism, this battlefield called life, portals to the other side, no longer studying war. It makes me think what there is to study besides war. Ain't nobody studying you. Black people fed up. Then I thought about some of the times I heard black people turn studies meaning around. A word that do not acquiring knowledge now deployed to declare we no longer worrying about you. The you could denote any force that tries to prevent us from being. That force has many names. Its spirit inhabits many people. Not studying you declares that you, insofar as you carry that spirit, that force, are now inconsequential, no longer worthy of consideration. And low key, stop wasting my time. There were the church-based Sunday schools and the Harlem YMCA study groups and freedom schools, the Black Power political education sessions, and Saturday morning convenings at the Q University. These are the undercommons, or where the formal meaning of study is purposely eschewed. We knew we had bigger fish to fry than the acquisition of fancy credentials or becoming complicit in global domination or whatever reasons other people study nowadays. Black study is an invitation. The difference is in the intention. Black people studying together is an intentional act of love and struggle in order to get at where we are and what it is we are up against. When Jordan said we tend to study the quote impersonal, the immorality of the sciences, she also mentioned that study must be anchored by Black study. There is the difference. Study is necessary for our souls to be well. Love of the holy word is an act of war against political order, against this nation of violence and private property, which are all nations, it feels like. We are surrounded by notions of power that are, as June Jordan writes, quote, at all times intrinsically opposed to at least some human life, end quote. Study is deciding that it is time to move on and away. Yet it is also knowing some things we will never fully know. Some meanings will remain obscured, will pass all our understanding. One thing Black folk can't stand is a know-it-all. All of what we know that we know must be anchored in something beyond ego and individual genius. Our study is a practice designed to get us closer to knowing, closer to each other, to the unseen forces that make us, not for and through domination, but closer in a real sense to our lives, being in touch with who we really are, what the universe really is, so that we may move closer to a world where we ain't got to study war no more. This is what Black study means. This is work that exists beyond the realms of formal knowledge. It resists the form. It breaks out of the enchantment with ivory brilliance. And it announces to the university, the academic disciplines and their attendant logics, ain't nobody studying you. And so that's part one of what I wanted to present today. That study from the forthcoming book, edited by Tina Camp. And then there's this word practice. And I'm realizing that as I get older, I can't use the Allen Iverson example as much as I used to. But this idea of practice versus the game, what does it mean to focus on, think about practice as distinct from what we might call, in Allen Iverson's parlance, the real issue, which is the game? And who needs practice? And so this is part two, practice. Practice is a thing you do. in order, and you must. It is a rhythm, a continuation of a beat. It is knowing that there has to be some consistency of movement for anything to shift. Life is practice because life is a cycle. Everything we do to create life must become a practice. Study is a practice, the limits of which are never reached. Every day you practice and then you rest, and you practice again the next day. Reading and writing are practices. They are foundational to our living practices. We cannot live without practicing these practices. There are many kinds of reading, many kinds of writing. There is the reading of books, there is the reading of nature, there is the reading of relationships, there is the reading of time, there is the reading of the unseen. These are all things that humans must study. There are those who write books. There are those who write sounds. There are those who write movement. There are those who write and inscribe meaning in the very way we speak, the way we feel, the way we decide to love each other. We are always writing something, even if that means we are not opening up files on word processing software. For peoples of African descent, we are connected to traditions that made these forms of study and writing part of the rhythm of life. Forms that were accountable to community, accountable to definitions of society that held each other, and no one above the other's accountability to the whole. And yet, none of this was or is easy, but it was practice. It met challenges, but it did not prevent challenges. And so from here, I want to move into part three of the presentation. And part three is composed of another set of threes. And I'm calling it right now three theses. The first thesis is we need study in a time of trouble. We need study in a time of trouble. In 2020, I wrote an article during the uprisings for New York University Press entitled Black Study in a Time of Trouble. In that article, I tried to contextualize how Black studies might offer insights for what was occurring in the streets. Too often, the symbiotic relationship of the streets and study had been misunderstood. Our clarity sacrificed at the altar of things we apparently do not need to know. But again, an expansive notion of study that went beyond simply assuming that reading produces action can be useful. Those who argue that study should come before action are missing key contexts. Yet, the clarifying process that study might offer is rooted in ways of knowing that go beyond the binaries of thought and practice, which were foisted upon us. And so, in the end, Black study means going back to the well. One of the ways our ancestors reckoned with crisis was through the concept time of trouble. In the Middle Egyptian, this is translated as rek in men. It's three words, rek in men. Rek in men was the period where there's a loss of identity, a loss of purpose, a loss of power. The Egyptologists call it the intermediate periods. And in order for society to recover, they needed to regain a sense of what society and life should be. And in order to gain a sense of what life and identity should be, they talked about repeating their birth. And so, aligned with Reckon Men, Time of Trouble, is a concept called Weheme Mesu, which means repetition of birth. In times of trouble, you repeat the birth. In order to repeat the birth, you had to have scholars, you had to have political leaders, you had to have artists, you had to have everybody in between. You had to have everybody who's responsible for the maintenance, which is everybody, engaged in a practice of restoration of our memory of what life was and what life meant at the beginning, at birth. In other words, there were those who knew what to do in moments of crisis and challenge, but there was not a formula for what you do. You don't do the same thing every time. Repetition of the birth allowed for specific episodic challenges to be contextualized and creatively addressed to each unique challenge, to each distinct moment. The question, and this is what guided the dynamism of this practice, was how might our memory serve us now? Translated across millennia, we now simply call this historical consciousness. But the problem with these translations is when and how we begin history. If we start our history of radicalism in the 1960s, or if we start our history of resistance with slavery or with modernity, we lessen our capacity for understanding where we are on the map of human history, as John Henry Clark would have it. We need to use study to seriously map out the crisis we are in because it is both unique and unprecedented, but it is also much more expansive than the names we often give it. This crisis may be even axial or epical, which means if we don't have the conceptual language to face the world in our own terms, the only thing that we can do is reupholster Western notions of time and space that keep us in lockstep with how it defines crisis and catastrophe, leaving us bereft of solutions that lead us back to our own thinking and our own conclusions. Study enables us to understand that we are not even operating in most cases within our own notions of time. And if we don't understand what time it is, we can't expect to understand the true nature of our crisis. And we certainly cannot expect to sustain a full-on assault against it. We need study in a time of trouble. Thesis number 2. We created the Radical Study Group. We created the Radical Study Group. We do a great job of appreciating the significance of Black labor to capital. We do less of a good job of detailing how Black labor created an intellectual infrastructure of anti-capitalism. We were the ones who offered the earliest forms of resistance, both materially and conceptually, to the capitalist world order. Of course, this gets lost when we don't study. And when that gets lost, we fall back into a loop of not knowing that we, who sit in study groups like this one, are already heirs to the resistance tradition we are looking for in the books. In West African apprenticeship traditions, certain occupations like that of a blacksmith or a singer were baked into the socialization process. One knew what one was and what one was going to be from the moment of birth. As Daniel Black artfully underscores in his The Coming, those traditions came with us. We brought secret societies to the plantations and stole away. And we stole away in order to study and to fulfill the thing that we were supposed to be. Part of what the stealing away and the hush harbor and the going into the woods was about was reconvening with our ancestral traditions. And so there's this material need to link the stealing of labor, right, which has a very clear political and economic impact on the plantation. And then there's the linking of that with I'm trying to reconvene something that was taken away from me in terms of who I am. What better inspiration for revolt? And when the time was right, revolt happened. But you had to be on your own time. But the most consistent element of our resistance was turning away the maroon sensibility. In maroon traditions, we could recreate our apprenticeship and ensuring the next generation would have the knowledge base that it needed. And so by the time you get to the 19th century and all of these wars of emancipation are waged, and Haitian Revolution, the revolutions in Brazil and Jamaica and Cuba, and yes, in the United States, a lot of that maroon sensibility can come a little bit more out in the open. And it morphs into Black institution building. It morphs into the creation of all Black towns. It morphs into the tradition that the Malcolm X grass movement stands on. But the Maroons said, look, part of what we got to do is ensure that the next generation knows. And so they create formal and informal education spaces. The Maroons who became soldiers during the United States Civil War, for instance, some of them were only part of that fight so they could get access to books, access to letters, access to the ability to maneuver in this society through the word. And then churches caught on, and new institutions are created that catch on. And though stealing away never really stops, we could do some of this above water. And even though we were resource poor, Black struggles turn to the word over and over and over. Children were taught to recite and speak as well as read. Adults who had spent their childhoods in the fields came home to listen to others who could read, bring them the news. This reading circles and literary clubs. We cultivated our own collections, our own libraries. People like Arturo Schomburg came along, and school teachers came along, and they themselves theorized the best way to control the narrative of our history in league with people like Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. The Harlem History Club was founded as a working class adjunct to the self-determined spaces, and through the first half of the 20th century, we built our own. Even on the left, the genealogy of study that culminates with the Detroit working class circles in the 1960s, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers can be traced to George Wells Parker and the struggle over African history, the struggle over what it means to be African through the African Blood Brotherhood, through the Communist Party struggles, and through the struggles within the Communist Party and the Johnson Forest tendency and other formations that are simply saying, we got to understand stuff first. These were workers, just as their enslaved ancestors were, wanting to figure things out. The Nation of Islam featured a similar process, and everyone who was involved in these formations studied. And so by the time the 1960s comes around, we had already done over 100 years of formal Black controlled study group traditions. And that's only in the US. If we lengthen this to include a Pan-Africanist perspective, we will find more and more examples. We've never not been a curious people, and figuring out meant more study. The process of PE, political education, came to me at a critical time in my own development. In DC, one could still find the remnants of this tradition. And after being introduced to George Jackson in one such setting in 2009, I would find myself in a study group organization, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, the next year as I settled down in graduate school. Founded in 1984, this organization has been committed to the promotion of the study of ancient Africa and all of its tributaries that come out of that past. It has generated a method of ensuring that study is foregrounded in the work of African liberation. And personally, it has given me a sense of purpose as I navigate both the academic context and the political circumstances that ensnare us, particularly in Black studies. It has helped me answer the question of what it is we are doing and why. We created the Radical Study Group. Thesis number 3. We are threatened by technology we'll never control. Study is critical because our miseducation continues, but it has migrated online to cyberspace. When our study groups, our study traditions are weak, folk will go elsewhere. When our institutions are weak, folk will learn on their own. Technology has stepped into the breach and has already harmed us. Hopefully, not irreparably so. But in my world, young people are coming to college with less and less critical thinking skills. Importantly, they are not less smart. They are not less brilliant. They are, however, told by the larger society that they no longer need to use their brains. Everything is already settled. To me, this is the major implication of artificial intelligence. It's the idea that nothing new can be imagined, only remixed. This is coupled with the rampant misinformation that we find on social media. Social media is the primary space that young people not only get their news, they get their ideological training there. We're in a scary moment. But study is a break. It pauses all of this. And if we can get our young people back to thinking, it will enhance the courage with which they have already demonstrated in confronting this moment. And I don't mean we need to create a new vanguard. I don't mean that we need to reinforce the idea of cultivating an intellectual class that will lead the rest of us. What I'm talking about is ensuring once again that the ethos that guided the decision of our ancestors to turn to the word in those early moments is both remembered and updated to the needs of the present. Because I can't live in a world, I don't want to live in a world where we allow our children to confront the world without all the tools that they need. And in fact, part of what makes Black studies distinct is our refusal to concede that point. None of us should be, and I say this maybe, I don't know, tongue in cheek, but we should not have to endure what we endure in universities. But the reason that we must stay and we stay is because part of what we have to ensure is that there's somebody that's there. Because there's going to be Black kids that are there. And if we don't have relationships and connections to spaces like MXGM and like ASCAC and other formations that are doing the work outside of those boundaries, then we'll lose purpose for why we even stay in these spaces and endure the things that we endure when we should not be enduring them. And so while I'm focused primarily on young people, this is relevant for all folk because all folk are, I would say, threatened by this new technological age that says that everything is already figured out and you don't have to think anymore. We see how that produces and reproduces not only harm, it produces a level of confusion about the stakes of what we are up against. And so, one beautiful thing that happened during the encampments of 2024 is that young people, 18 years old, 19 years old, came to us and said, we hear words like capitalism, we hear words like imperialism, we hear words like colonialism, we hear these words and we even use these words, but we're not sure we know what they mean. Many of them who are struggling and will become the next generation of people that join MXGM, they know that they have these questions and they want to get them resolved. And so part of what we have to ensure continues to happen is that we have study groups that we can send them to and say, look, spend the next 6 months understanding what imperialism is. Because guess what? The university is not going to do that. And so the slow and patient work is coming back. And it's the only way that I see us having a chance in this moment of, some people would say, technological advance. I'm not sure it's an advance. And so I want for all of our children to remember, and I want for all of us to remember that this isn't about any notion of an elite. This isn't about any notion of distancing the so-called intellectuals from everyone else. Because if you realize that we created mass education in the first place, if you go back to Reconstruction, the idea was that everybody needed to know. And so, what I found that works, I like that principle, be programmatic. So, here's what I found that works is that when you have people who are in the room who are curious, the best thing that we can do, the best thing that I've seen done is really going back to basics. Chapter and verse, literally slowly, deliberately, and often painstakingly breaking sentences down to their basic basic assumptions and meanings. And what it does also is I talked about earlier, reorienting ourselves around time and space. It helps people who are curious and people who want to think realize that there is an urgency, but that doesn't mean everything has to be done quickly. And I've seen this work with not only Gen Z, I've seen it work with boomers too. One of the study groups that I was a part of, we took a year and a half to read one book, and the book was less than 200 pages. But the idea was if we go slow, if we are deliberate, if we work through people's questions, if we work through people's dilemmas, it not only helps us master the ideas that are in this text, the text becomes the thing that forges the community, that creates the bonds, that creates the trust, that creates the thing that allows us to be human together in that space. A black book is not just a physical or material trace of our intellectual tradition. It is also something that connects us spiritually to not only the writers, but to the peoples that are being written about. And so we're going to have to make similar sacrifices for our people and with our people. AI is not only not a shortcut for that work, it is not even capable of that work. We cannot have our conversations with ourselves mediated by our enemies. This is the principal lesson of those ancestors who stole away and then sold themselves and then revolted. They knew that the conversation was first an internal conversation. We got to get ourselves together. And it is not just our bodies that were under attack, it was our minds, it was our cultural traditions, and it is. It still is. There is something specific about our that only we can do for ourselves. Study was one part of the recipe, the calculus, the brew. And in our best traditions, the tradition of Nat Turner, in our best traditions, the tradition of Queen Nani, in our best traditions, the tradition of Zumbi dos Palmares, in our best traditions, the traditions of Malcolm X, the traditions of Snake, in our best traditions, it was always pursued alongside a deep devotion to the whole self, the whole community, the whole world, the whole universe. We can only do this right if we keep that in mind. Thank you all for listening. I know I didn't have any slides, so this is how I kind of roll nowadays, but thank you so much, Asante Sana, and I look forward to engaging you all in the next phase. Thank you.
Wow, wow, wow. My brother. Thank you so much for wow, thank you so much for that. I'm not gonna take up too much space. I think we wanna offer it up to Q&A at this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks can drop it in the chat or use the question and answer function if they have it, or if they want, we can bring them on and allow them to talk.
So I see Kia Gregory has a hand raised.
Thank you. Dr. Myers, thank you. I remember you from part of the SNCC Legacy Project, one of their anniversaries. So thank you so much for this. This was amazing. I have a question about self-study.
Yeah.
Any recommendations you can recommend for that? Sometimes I feel behind. I really appreciated what you said about the study group you were in, that you took a year and a half to read a book was 200 pages. Sometimes I read something and it takes me somewhere else. And not to let my ego get involved, but I feel like, man, I have so much to study. I feel like I'm playing catch up because I'm coming to this awakening. So I wanted to ask you about self-study, not as far as material, but I talk to the ancestors before I read, and then I just ask it to do what it's going to do. But just any tips you have on self-study, or even if you can plot it out, outlining where should one begin. But I'm more interested in your thoughts on how to engage with the material. So you're not just reading, but you are studying and then thinking of ways, based on your own lived experience, to apply it. And thank you.
Yeah. First of all, it's good to hear your voice again. Thanks for coming. Um, I think you said something really important. You said you asked the ancestors before you began, right? And so the first thing I would say is that. Trust that, right? Trust that by making that request that the thing that you need to get, right, will you will get in the time that you need to get it. Um, Beyond that, when a more I don't want to use the word pragmatic or functional, but I guess in a more direct way, like so much of being guided by what you do with yourself is guided by the purpose, right? And so if you are saying, for instance, preparing to teach a class, right? And you want to deliver like knowledge to other people, but in order to do that, you need to brush up on something, for instance, right? Then part of what I think is necessary is you have to map out how you get there and hold yourself to that standard, hold yourself to that discipline. One of the things that I wanted to share um, was like another layer of this, which is like the Du Bois way. Du Bois was pretty isolated when it came to like his own projects or his own agenda, I should say. Now he worked with other people, but he had his own method of getting there that was just him. And so his individualism was rooted in what the community needed, but it was an individualism. It was, I'm going to wake up at 7 o'clock every day, no matter what, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And this was like an interesting thing for me because when I was studying the way that he studied, what came clear is that Du Bois did so much work because he was so extremely disciplined, almost to the disadvantage of the other people around him, right? And so there's like a way that we can overdetermine this if we keep it rooted in just our individual needs. And so coupled with finding out the rhythm, finding out the balance for a particular project is find the community, find your people. And then that could mean one other person. It could mean two other people. It doesn't have to be a whole organization, right? But doing things in community helps create the balance that you might feel is missing, or the trajectory that you might not feel that you're on, but it reaffirms that you might really be there. And the boys had to learn later on, like, all right, I did all these great things, but what was the sacrifice that I made? And was it worth it in the end? Some might say yes in some ways, but no in other ways. But that's a great question because so much of what I'm doing right now as an academic is individualized study. But also the way that I address it is if I'm studying a topic, that means my classes are studying that topic. I don't create distance between what I do in the classroom and what I do as an individual scholar. So that's my way of addressing that particular question. And students are honest; they can tell you when you're not making sense, right? And so I think it's about finding your people, finding your community in any way that you can. And absent that, understanding that your ancestors are going to be there regardless.
Thank you for that answer, Josh. We've got another question. I resonated with your point that AI emphasizes everything is figured out. How do you cultivate curiosity as a means of challenging that assumption, both within oneself and in community?
Curiosity, how do we cultivate it? Wow. So I think that I think from the perspective of organizing, right? We have so many methods for that. I think, thinking with the snake elders for the last 6, 7 years, um, the basic principle was what are people already thinking about, right? Just to give you a quick example, like, and this is something that my friend Ray Baker always talks about. He's an organizer, labor organizing in Baltimore. He says part of what he has to do to cultivate curiosity is watch Ravens games. because the working folk that he organizes with, that's what they're already thinking about. And so how can I connect what the hell is happening in the NFL and the Baltimore Ravens to the message as an organizer that I want to give or connect with people? That's an old SNCC method, right? You go to the juke joint, you go to the plantation, you go where people are, and you don't come with assumptions, you come with questions. What are you already thinking about? And so for me, like what the threat represents is this idea that what we're already thinking about is curated and mediated. It's not organic. And I think that, being a social media veteran, I've been dealing with social media for too damn long, since 2004, maybe three. Actually 2002, my first Black Planet page, 2002, is that so much of this is inorganic, right? When you think about the discourse, if you will, it's rooted in algorithms, it's rooted in what is not under our control. And so, what are Black people thinking about organically, and how is that mediated? Is it mediated? And is there a place now? And this is a big question that I have with like, is there a place now where it is unmediated? And to me, that's what's scary. That's what's scary. And so we end up having to often respond to a discourse not mediated by us because Black folks don't have, in the technology, at least in the technological realm, an unmediated space. Um, so if you didn't have a take on sinners, you couldn't talk to Black people for like a good 2 weeks. And this goes beyond the like cyberspace, right? Because it happened, it ended up affecting me in like real space too. And so it's a difficult balance. It's a difficult balance. And I think organizers, like we're gonna have to figure this part out because we don't want to not have something to say, but we also have to be careful about what we are saying and how it's mediated to our people.
Mm. So we got 5 questions. So I'm gonna just ask the next one that came up in order. And then Josh, you can take a look at the other ones and yeah, see what you think. Next one is where do you point to as examples of self-determined learning communities of African diasporans? Like which institutions of learning are decolonized that we can look to, if any?
Yeah, the most prominent ones are, and not, so here's the thing about decolonization. Like, because we are in this world, nothing is really truly decolonized. If things are truly decolonized, there would be no colonization. And so we're in, and again, this is this whole question of time and space. Where time is it and where are we? Right? Part of how we have to think about this is to understand that we are in two different life cycles, probably more than two. We are in a life cycle that connects us to the things that are oppressing us, and we are in a life cycle that is who we really are. And who we really are, those two often push up against. In fact, that's the struggle. That's what struggle. And so the question of who we really are has often been addressed in spaces, I won't say that are decolonized, but are autonomous, at least temporarily, because it's in struggle with the thing that's preventing us from being who we are. And so those spaces have traditionally been spiritual, right? Because part of what we recognize first is that our soul has to be taken care of. And usually, when you take into account African spiritualities and all of the ways that they manifest, those are the most, or traditionally have been the most autonomous spaces to do the things that we needed to do. The schools came out of those spaces, the businesses, the banks, the insurance company, all of that, all of the things that like practically deal with material existence came out of those spiritual spaces. And so if I were to answer that question both historically and now, I would follow where Black people worship to get answers to that question. I know we're running low on time, so I'm gonna kind of truncate some of these answers.
Yeah, I think we got time for one more. How do we balance logic with ancestral wisdom, ancestral memory, and spiritual gifts in pursuit of our studies? And if you could do that in like 1 minute
Yeah.
and a half, that'd be dope.
So formal logic is one thing, and uh, I guess we could say the things that we can't see, right, is another. And I would say that, for us Africans, these things are not totally separate worlds. There is a balance. Balance is the living of life, right? The reckoning with the existence, the recognition that so much of what I do in my day-to-day life has nothing to do with me. The actual recognition of that. And yet I have agency at the same time. And so in order to like balance these kind of notions, part of what our people did was ritual, right? And the easiest way to kind of say this in a short amount of time is the rituals were reminders that you were very small, but you were also significant at the same time. And life was about that recognition. The ability to breathe, survive was about that recognition. And when you don't have that recognition, that's when chaos enters your life.
Time goes by fast when you're having fun. Thank you so much, my brother.
Yes, sir.
Much appreciation. All the gems around practice, accountability. I mean, just so much. Um, I'm gonna turn it over to my tech person. If you could throw up the slide that we have, we want to relatedly lift up an opportunity to donate to this camp, Camp Pumzico, which is a week-long camp that is hosted just outside of Atlanta in Georgia, where we politicize and help build survival skills for new African youth between the ages of 6 and 17. And so we're gonna drop the link to how folks can support with our camp. I've had the pleasure of serving as a counselor and an educator for that camp over the last 2 summers, and it's transformative, right? We talk about self-determination and what that looks like in practice, and doing it with our young people. I mean, it's a sight to see, and so folks should definitely feel free to go ahead and follow this link. I think I'll drop it up in this joint for y'all real quick. Bam. And support what we got going on. There might be some slots maybe for young people. If you got some folks, young people in your lives who could pull up. So we're now going to transition to classes. And so the class Zoom room will be opening shortly. All should have gotten the links, but we'll drop it again. Please follow your class Zoom link and enter your break. I guess we're not doing breakout rooms. I think we're having separate links. Just a reminder.
Yep.
Yes, that's correct. Just a reminder that all the classes are full. And so we thank all the people who supported with this summer school, and we will be doing the next iteration of our public facing, um, I guess, lectures that will be coming up. Why don't I have this right here already? Is it next week? No, the week after?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yep. And so, yeah, so with that, we will bid you all adieu. Thank you all so much. We will be uploading this one to our YouTube channel as soon as we can. Anything else from folks that want to lift up from the team?
I think that's
Great
it.
work.
Free to
Thank
land.
you.
All
Free
right.
land.
All right. Free land by any means necessary. Y'all take care and see